and guys and girls who help the so-called community, um, their alleged authorities, etc., is often, more often than not, actually and absolutely colored, which means misrepresented, which means artificial, which means distorted, which means also personating positions of authority that don't exist with them and is not vested in them, um, and also fundamental frauds and misrepresentations in general. However, being aware of many of these words and phrases that we presented to you as a background of your vocabulary, it will get you more grounded in vetting people who claim authority in your lives at all, under any condition, and also bring you to a level of more competent self-governance by which you can protect yourself, your interests, your properties, your hereditaments, corporal and incorporeal, etc., all of which have been abridged, trespassed against, abused, and stolen by people you thought were actually operating in your interest. And the opposite has been the case.
Excuse me, Grand Chief.
Go ahead.
Did you include the word bank and bench?
Yes. Well, that I didn't get to that. Well,
Okay. All right.
That's also important. The words bank and bench. Write that down too, anyway, since you brought that up.
And birth.
Huh?
Birth, I, birth, E.
Yeah. Birth, B-I-R, and birth, B-E-R. Both of them.
And this is another one I got for you, Fred.
Hmm?
Parents, P-A-R-E-N-T-S, and pair, P-A-I-R, rents, R-E-N-T-S, 2 words.
Parents. Interesting.
Pair rents, because it has to do with diversity.
Yes. But anyway, now for one point of interest for you all, particularly because the nature of sharing with you words and phrases, uh, myself and Dr. Nail was talking earlier about this subject matter. And while this is not new to many of you, it is new to some of you. And so we'll give you an idea or the nature of the importance of why we're sharing this with you. As an example, symboliography, which many of you have not been particularly aware of. So symboliography is the symbolic writing, and this deals with many of the instruments that have been presented to you in the name of social structure and government. As an example, the semantic deceit, which is constructed when they issue marriage certificates, the semantic deceit in symboliography, which is executed when they issue birth certificates, driver's licenses, CDLs, and any other instruments which are known as bottomry instruments coming from operatives of the corporate state who claim to be government on behalf of serving the people. And all of these instrumentalities are constructed with symboliography, and this has much to do as to why certain communities and people have been artfully targeted for poverty and for gentrification, and then at the same time, the people not suspecting that they were actually being engineered by people who were issuing these instruments. And these instruments are all constructed in symboliography. Being aware of that, you will look at things totally different And of course, it will change your perspectives, but most importantly, it will change your actions if you're responsible to yourselves and to your families. And this has much to do with the reasoning as to why we, over the years, have been sharing a lot of this fundamental civic information with people, because we know that the people in general, all of us, have been suffering from semantic deceits unbeknownst to ourselves, because we trusted these people who were so-called, quote unquote, educating us and so-called, quote unquote, governing over our affairs, all of whom have extremely violated us and actually trespassed us against us on many levels. So symboliography is symbolic writing. It is the art, excuse me, because I want you all to remember to review this and write some of this stuff down. And those of you who have Bouvier's law dictionaries and Black's law dictionaries, Bell's law dictionaries, all your law dictionaries, and your unabridged dictionaries, do cross-reference and study. Symboliography is the symbolic writing, and it is the art and the cunning rightly to form and to make written instruments. I repeat, symboliography, which is symbolic writing, is the art or the cunning rightly to form and to make written instruments. This also would include what you know as writs, etc. It is either judicial or extrajudicial. So write those words now too. Judicial and extrajudicial. Get used to it because it occurs in your lives every day. The latter being wholly occupied with such instruments as concern matters not yet judicially in controversy, such as instruments of agreements or of contracts or and of testaments or of last wills. Repeat. Symboliography instruments concern matters not yet judicially or presented yet in controversy judicially, such as instruments of agreements or contracts, and instruments of testaments, and instruments of last wills. And so you're dealing with the issue of trusts, etc., things that go on every day that is not brought to your attention because you've been abridged on many of these, in many of these areas on a constant basis, and is actually the source of most of the injury and poverty suffered by the people at large. And indeed, many of the people are not aware that the poverty problems that exist at Midgard on the planet, etc., have been artificially constructed and are not harmonic in nature. Might sound odd to many of you, however, that's the absolute truth. And because many of these things are being addressed by the awakening people at Midgard, a lot of these things that have not been discussed in the past will become more commonly discussed openly. And so it is important that we share some of these things with you, that some of you who are interested will be in a more competent position to start dealing with your affairs, because it's going to be in your best interest to start dealing with your own affairs. Because as you discover, and you will discover, and not so much that you're discovering, they're going to show you. You're going to see corruption on a scale that your mind, many of you, will have difficulty wrapping your mind around the corruption that is going to be exposed to you. in the near coming future. And it is in your own interest to, for those of you who haven't been on this path of studying, to start getting yourself together. Even though many of us are late in the game, if you're still breathing and you're still not totally destroyed, although most of you have been economically injured severely and hindered severely and socially injured severely and socially handicapped severely and socially constricted severely, there's still movement and you're still breathing. Better late than never is the phrase that I present to you in this matter. So take heed and keep in mind, just as Dr. Naila shared a few more words and phrases with me, the issue is not limited to what we presented to you, but one thing or two things will lead you to other information. And in doing so, you will be made more competent in your everyday affairs. It is absolutely necessary that you do become more acute in your knowledge about civics, governmental structure. And as we shared with you all the past week or two about law and government and sovereignty, because this has been absolutely misrepresented to the people. And also the divine principle of sovereignty has been stolen from the people. Many people are not aware that it is not granted to you by government, etc. It is a divine, original nature of your relationship with your divine creator, etc. And that's a fact. And it has been stolen by people who have been claiming to be government, and also by others who have been saying falsely that you gave it to them, and they have had a right by consent on your behalf to abuse you, to abuse your estate, to gain and accumulate extreme wealth at your expense, and to also genocide you out when you protest or say anything that conflicts with their agenda of genocide and world governance, etc., or world conquest in the name of government, when in fact they have not been legitimate government around the planet for actually generations. And this is part of the corruption that has been entrenched at Midgard that you're going to find out. And logically, it is in your interest not to be handicapped in recognizing some of these things that will be coming up as far as information, the information basis of issues that will be presented to you in your everyday affairs, particularly as the persons that you trusted as government will be more and more openly abusing you, more and more openly stealing from you, and more openly using color of authority, color of office, and color of law to regulate you and to regulate your families to your injury and to their economic, social, and political benefit, which they have been doing, but you had not been aware of it. And that's been problematic. And logically, as the world or the people of the planet are waking up more and more, those persons who you thought was government are clamping down and starting to do a lot of spurious things to cause more injury to the people, to maintain their corrupted powers that have been artificially stolen by misrepresentation and personation and by corruption and by force of arms. And so even though they're criminal thieves, human traffickers, etc., they're using the sovereign powers that you have given up or not maintained and trusted them with and using it against you. That's what they've been doing. And rather than acknowledging the divine right of humanity and acknowledging natural law to which all nations are obligated, they have been absolutely working absolutely to the contrary and against the interest of the people of the planet, Midgard, etc. And so has much to do reasoning why we're sharing this information, though redundant, with you all tonight. And this has more to do with people who are waking up and have not had what you would call general resource information in these matters of civics and birthright restoration and in matters of reversion of a state. And also in matters of comprehending, you might say, mission motive of, as an example, the Moorish Divine and National Movement of the world, as established by our illustrious prophet Noble Drew Ali, and clarity would be shed on the mission operations of the Moorish Divine National Movement with your comprehension of many of these words and phrases, because you will see that many of them are operative and have been operative, but have not been discussed by many people who have injured you or have been robbing you or have been misguiding you, etc., and cheating you unbeknownst to you. This is again why many people don't get into these subject matters, or some people get very sensitive about it because it exposes criminality on multiple levels. And so with that, relative to other things, when we talk about cases as reference, not as sources of authority, but as reference to demonstrate or to show obligations on the part of people who say they have authority. Because very often here and there, we'll mention different law situations or cases that they may refer to as stare decisis. And so we'll share to you or share with you what stare decisis actually means. Stare decisis. The root word in Latin is to abide by, to adhere to, decided cases. And so this is where you have what is known as, quote unquote, established law. So look at established law and also look at any law that you would call constitutional, distinguished from color of law, distinguished from color of authority, etc. These would be rules or principles that are not disputable. So whenever you hear of a case that's referred to as stare decisis, it can not be contradicted by any administrator or persons or body of persons claiming to be judges, etc., or any so-called courts, etc., having any delegated authority to execute or justice or to make decisions in any law case. So stare decisis references cases that cannot be disputed in relationship to other like cases, etc. So stare decisis, the policy of stare decisis was the policy of the courts to stand by, quote unquote, precedent and not to disturb settled points. And then you would have different references so that you could look at different cases to see the consistency or of the likeness of principal cases that are not to be disputed. And so if you have another instance of a case that's related to a case that has been ruled or placed in stare decisis, you would already know that technically, by fact, unless you have corruption in the operations of the alleged court, that you already have a win, meaning that can't be disputed. That would be called, stare decisis cases would be called constitutionally settled cases, no longer disputable relative to any other case that's related in this nature, like that case. Means it need not to be litigated. So it's the doctrine that when a court has once laid down a principle of law as applicable to a certain state of facts, it will adhere to that principle and apply it to all future cases or like cases where facts are substantially the same, and regardless of whether the parties and the property are the same. And under doctrine of stare decisis, a deliberate or solemn decision of courts made after argument on questions of law fairly arising in the case and necessary to its determination is an authority or binding precedent in the same court or in other courts of equal or lower rank in subsequent cases where the very point is again in controversy. And so, stare decisis is the doctrine, is one of policy grounded on theory that surety or security, and certainly required that accepted and established legal principle under which rights may accrue be recognized and followed through later, though later found to be not legally sound. But whether previous holding of court shall be adhered to, modified, or overruled is within the court's discretion under circumstances of cases of each case before it. So under the stare decisis doctrine, when a point of law has been settled by decision, it forms precedence, which is not afterwards to be departed from, and while it should ordinarily be strictly adhered to, there are occasions when departure is rendered necessary to vindicate plain, obvious principles of law and remedy continued injustice. And so the stare decisis doctrine is a solitary one and should not ordinarily be departed from when decisions of long standing and rights have been acquired under it, unless consideration of public policy demanded. And so you have many cases that you can refer to have a better comprehension of the principles of stare decisis. And so federal courts should in all instances follow the law of the state with respect to the construction of state statutes, and where that law has been determined by the courts of last resort, their decisions are stare decisis and must be followed, irrespective of federal courts' opinions concerning what the law ought to be. But with respect to the pronouncement of other state courts, federal courts are not so bound and may conclude that decision does not truly express the state law, etc. So essentially, stare decisis is harmonic with constitutional principles, and once those principles are established, you have multiple cases which will be listed as stare decisis as examples for you to look at and for you to review. And if cases come up of similar nature and of like nature, etc., the fundamental principle is that the fundamental precedent of law shall be held and shall be executed without interruption, without constriction, without delay, etc. So stare decisis is the established law.
I have another one for you.
Say again?
Another word. Signature versus autograph.
Versus autograph.
Well, because signature is that legal, that's a corporate signature. But when you go to a person, you say, "Can I get your autograph?"
Yes.
So that's you.
Yes.
The signature is the legal.
Yes. Legal process distinguished. Yes. And so you have classification relative, and this is back to people really having a comprehension of the semantic deceit on how person is used,
right.
Or the natural being, the natural person being the living, breathing man, woman, or child, and the corporate person being a legal ens legis construct constructed by the corporate state operatives, etc., for usually spurious or less than honorable intent, etc., and is indeed not the living sentient man or woman. And this is where often they use what you many of you already know when you hear the man of straw issue or straw man. That's what that is.
Also name.
Huh?
Name.
Name also the same thing. Name means corporation unless otherwise so noted. Then this is back to where you have the semantic deceit, where the people are not told that when in trust of government, etc., persons who claim to be government, when they ask you what is your name, the semantic deceit is that they're not telling the people that they're asking you what is your corporation. And now, as soon as you talk corporation, now you're talking a foreign entity. And remember this: whenever you hear them say the word corporation, put right behind it in parentheses Vatican. If you keep that in mind, whenever you hear someone say corporation or LLC, follow it with property of Vatican, quote unquote, property of the Vatican and the Bishopric of Rome. All corporate entities constructed in the modern era are the property of Rome and are treated accordingly. And logically, this has much to do with a lot of the economic distress that people are suffering and not having a clear comprehension of what's happening to them. Even when they send people foreign bills of exchange and say that you owe them a tax on income, and the people don't know that they're lying, that they just listed you as a foreign corporation doing business in their private port, birthing in their private port, and that's the basis of what income is. It has nothing to do with anything else. It has nothing to do with wages or pecuniary compensation for you, for your labor, for someone else. Has absolutely no connection whatsoever. However, the semantic deceit is that the criminals operating as government, personating as government, have been training the people over generations that their labor was and is income, and that their pecuniary compensations for their labor on a job, etc., is income. All of that is an absolute lie. It's not a misjudgment. It's an absolute lie, absolute semantic deceit, absolute criminal theft. And they've been doing it for generations.
It's also interesting to note that the Latin word for crown is corona.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Corona also is. Yes, it is. And remember, crown, and again, like we talked about before, many people think that when you hear the word crown that they're talking about the Queen of England, etc. But they need to understand the crown is actually the lawyers, the attorneys, and the esquires are the crown. So the concepts even about the crown, as you can see, among the people, there's severe semantic deceit. Because as the people started learning about the corruption of colonial powers, they would always reference the Queen of England, wouldn't they? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And not know that the lawyer that they hired to do things are the crown. So you can see how this thing has been inculcated and entrenched in society, and by people not being aware of it, they actually hire the crown to protect them from the crown. So you can figure that out. And so you can see Also, why many people who have been aware of these facts don't tell you that when they start telling you they're going to take you through some legal process, some commercial process with these members of the crown to retrieve your birthright and your liberties, that without telling you the truth, the matter that they have you misrepresented in a false platform, that you will never win in that platform. This is again why it has been extremely important for the people to know how these things operate, and that the people have a right of reversion of estate, and that's what must be done, because you must come out of the false platform jurisdiction in your operations. This has much to do why over the years we've always encouraged people to start studying, to start writing writs and start doing reversion of estate, because the nature of the redemption or restoration or restitution of your lost estate cannot be done in the crown's platform.